As long as I can remember, I've been writing songs, poems. I didn't call them songs when I was a kid. I called them song poems.
They called him the Man in Black, but when Johnny Cash died, it wasn't his clothes that drew attention. It was the fate of his money. A fortune built on decades of sold-out concerts, timeless records, movie roles, and a voice that could shake prison walls should have landed exactly where everyone assumed. Family, legacy, a neat and respectful passing of the torch. But that's not how this story goes. Behind the tributes, behind the gospel hymns, and behind the quiet farewell headlines, Johnny Cash's wealth followed a path few saw coming, and even fewer were prepared for. Some were stunned, a few were hurt, and many still wonder how it happened. So follow us as we step past the legend and into the ledger, because the truth behind Johnny Cash's fortune isn't just surprising. It rewrites the final chapter of a musical icon's life. Death of a legend. When Johnny Cash passed away on the 12th of September 2003, the world fell silent in mourning because someone truly monumental had passed. Radio stations across America slipped into an unofficial mourning, replaying songs like Hurt, Ring of Fire, and Folsom Prison Blues in heavy rotation. Fans gathered outside museums and memorial sites, leaving flowers, candles, and handwritten letters. Newspapers ran full-page articles that detailed his legacy. Fellow musicians described him as a pillar of American music, a man who gave voice to the forgotten and dignity to the downtrodden. The public narrative was neat and followed the script almost all the legend's death did. A legend had passed away, and naturally, his music would live on forever through his family and fans. No one expected that while the world focused on tributes and candlelight vigils, a quieter process was unfolding behind closed doors. Lawyers were now preparing to open filing cabinets, preparing to carry out their roles as executors of a will long since written into documents in their care. Financial advisors contacted banks, record labels, and publishers. Family members, still deep in grief, began hearing words like trust structures, intellectual property rights, and estate administration, words that would cause a deep divide in a once united front. There was no sensational courtroom showdown splashed across tabloids, no accusations of theft or fraud that would name heroes and villains. What happened instead was more subtle and, to many, more shocking. As details of the estate plan surfaced, it became clear that Johnny Cash's vast fortune would not be divided in the way most people assumed, not evenly among all his children, or a surprising charity donation. For fans who had watched the Cash family perform together on stage, who had seen family photos in magazines, who had absorbed decades of public storytelling about unity and love, the actual sequence of events and revelations felt jarring. For some within the family itself, it was painful. For others, it simply confirmed decisions made long ago, in private, for reasons never fully shared with the outside world. This story, however, is not one of villains and victims. It is not a tale of greed or betrayal in the tabloid sense. Instead, it is a story about how enormous success changes the stakes of family life, how estate planning quietly shapes legacies, and how timing can alter destinies in ways no one predicts. To understand why the outcome surprised so many, one must first understand how a poor boy from rural Arkansas built a fortune so large that its distribution would one day become a story of its own, from cotton fields to a musical empire. Johnny Cash did not enter the world seemingly destined for wealth. He was born in 1932 in Kingsland, Arkansas, during a time when survival itself was an achievement. His parents were sharecroppers, part of a struggling farming community relocated to Diez, Arkansas, under a New Deal resettlement program. The Cash family lived in a modest wooden house with no luxuries, and from a young age he worked in cotton fields alongside his siblings. The money they earned was barely enough to keep food on the table. Yet even in those harsh conditions, music was always present. Gospel hymns filled the local church. A battered radio brought distant voices into the family home at night. Johnny absorbed the sounds of faith, sorrow, endurance, and hope, themes that would later define his songwriting. Long before wealth entered his life, he was already shaping the emotional depth that would eventually make him famous. After graduating from high school, he joined the United States Air Force and was stationed in Germany. There, during off-duty hours, he taught himself guitar more seriously and began writing songs. When he returned to America in the early 1950s, he headed to Memphis, a city buzzing with musical innovation. In 1954, he walked into Sun Records and asked to audition, and that audition changed everything. His early recordings at Sun, including Cry, 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 and I Walk the Line, were immediate hits. The sparse rhythm, the steady baritone, and the emotional directness set him apart from the polished crooners of the era. Within a few short years, he was no longer a struggling salesman with a guitar, but a rising national star. Unfortunately, early fame does not always equal fortune. Sun Records was a small label, and contracts of the time rarely favored young artists. Johnny made money, but the true financial transformation came in 1958, when he signed with Columbia Records. With a major label behind him, distribution widened, production budgets grew, and promotional power exploded. Albums sold in massive numbers, singles climbed the charts, royalties began flowing steadily. By the 1960s, Johnny Cash was releasing multiple albums a year. Every record sold generated income. Every radio play generated publishing revenue. Because he wrote much of his own material, he also owned valuable songwriting rights. That meant long-term royalty streams, a crucial foundation for the fortune that would later define his estate. Touring became another pillar of his earnings. He performed constantly, often playing hundreds of shows per year. He built a loyal fan base that stretched across America and beyond. Ticket sales, merchandise, appearance fees, and promotional deals all added to his growing wealth. Then came television. The Johnny Cash Show premiered on ABC in 1969, bringing him into millions of American living rooms every week. The program wasn't just a cultural milestone, it was a financial machine. The exposure boosted record sales, strengthened his brand, and opened the door to lucrative sponsorships and advertising relationships. By the early 1970s, he was no longer simply a musician. He had built an entertainment empire. He recorded prolifically, toured internationally, wrote autobiographies, appeared in films and television dramas, and marketed merchandise bearing his name. Each venture fed into the others, building a diversified income stream rare for artists of his generation. Yet success came with its own flavor of problems. John struggled with addiction, legal troubles, and health issues throughout the 1970s and 80s. His commercial momentum slowed. Changing musical trends pushed traditional country acts aside. For a time, it appeared that his financial peak might be behind him. But Johnny Cash's story was never linear. In the 1990s, producer Rick Rubin approached him with a radically simple concept. The idea was to strip away the band, strip away the production, and record songs in their rawest form. The result was American Recordings. The album stunned critics and audiences alike. His weathered voice, paired with intimate arrangements, felt timeless and urgent. A new generation discovered him, and sales once again surged. The later albums in the series continued the revival. His haunting cover of Hurt became iconic, accompanied by a music video that seemed to serve as a living farewell. Now the awards were back, chart success returned, and most importantly, the value of his entire back catalog skyrocketed. By the early 2000s, his music library was not just culturally priceless, it was financially formidable. Publishing rights, master recordings, licensing agreements, and branding opportunities formed an intellectual property portfolio capable of generating income for decades, even centuries. Industry estimates at the time of his death placed the total value of his estate somewhere between tens of millions and nearly $100 million, depending on catalog valuation methods. It included music rights, real estate, investments, and personal assets accumulated across nearly 5 decades of success. A sharecropper's son from rural Arkansas had built an empire of sound, story, and song, one that would outlive him. With an empire that large, the question of who would control it was never going to be simple. A family the world thought it knew to the public. Johnny Cash's life story had always included a second, equally famous narrative, his love story. The image of Johnny and June Carter Cash had become one of country music's most enduring legends. They sang together, prayed together, toured together, and stood as symbols of redemption and devotion. Fans saw them as inseparable, not just in marriage, but in mission. Their blended family appeared united by music and faith, a dynasty carrying forward a shared legacy. But behind the warm glow of stage lights and family Christmas albums lived a more complicated truth. His family life, like his music, was shaped by multiple chapters, each leaving emotional and legal footprints that would later matter more than anyone imagined. Before the world knew the name Johnny Cash, there was Vivien Liberto. A quiet, devoutly Catholic teenager from San Antonio, Vivien met Johnny in 1951. While he was stationed at Lackland Air Force Base, their romance was forged through thousands of handwritten letters sent while he was deployed to Germany. When they married in 1954, he was not a superstar. He was a struggling appliance salesman in Memphis, with a guitar and a dream. As his fame exploded following his recordings at Sun Records, the marriage began to buckle under the weight of a lifestyle Vivien never signed up for. Left at home in California with 4 young daughters whom they named Roseanne, Kathy, Cindy, and Tara, she became the anchor to a man who was increasingly adrift in a sea of amphetamines, alcohol, and the constant lure of the road. The effects of this first marriage on Johnny's later psyche were profound. He lived in a perpetual cycle of survivor's guilt. His early music was a literal dialogue with Vivien. I Walk the Line was written as a promise to stay faithful, a promise he found physically and emotionally impossible to keep. She represented the real John R. Cash, the simple sharecropper's son, while the industry demanded the Johnny Cash persona. This disconnect eventually created a vacuum that she, who shunned the spotlight and prioritized privacy, could not fill. Her refusal to join the circus of fame meant that when Johnny looked for a partner who understood his world, he didn't look toward home. He looked toward the wings of the stage. Shortly afterwards, Johnny married June Carter, the woman who had become his musical partner and spiritual anchor. June brought her own daughters into the marriage, creating a blended family that expanded again when Johnny and June had a son together in 1970. The boy was named John Carter Cash. June Carter did not enter his life as a blank slate. She was country music royalty, a member of the first family of country music. By the time her path crossed with Johnny's, she was a seasoned professional who had already navigated 2 high-profile marriages. The first was to singer Carl Smith, with whom she had Rebecca Carlene, and the second was to police officer Edwin Nix, whom she had Rosie. Her previous marriages and her upbringing in the Carter family dynasty shaped her approach to Johnny in a way that was both pragmatic and protective. Unlike Vivien, she understood the language of the industry. She didn't just want to be a wife, she was a performer, a manager, and a fixer. When she and Johnny finally married in 1968, she stepped into a role that was part matriarch and part savior. She famously helped Johnny through his initial withdrawal from pills, but this rescue created a powerful dynamic of codependency. She became the gatekeeper of his life. She managed his communications, influenced his creative choices, and provided the professional stability that his first marriage lacked. However, this fortress around him also served to isolate him. The more he relied on her to be his link to the world, the further he moved from the family he had built with Vivien. The most enduring effect of their previous partners was the blended nature of the household, which was often less of a blend and more of a collision. When Johnny and June wed, they brought together 6 daughters from 3 different fathers and 2 different mothers. The arrival of their only child together, John Carter Cash, in 1970, served as the definitive restarting point of the Cash legacy. From the outside, the Cash-Carter household looked like a family reborn. They performed together on stage. They recorded albums together. They presented themselves as a unified front, bound by faith, love, and music. Over time, June became more than Johnny's wife. She became his manager, creative collaborator, and primary decision-maker in many areas of his career. She helped guide his projects, negotiated with record labels, and played a central role in shaping his public image. To fans, this partnership felt natural. Johnny and June were seen as two halves of a legendary whole. Their children, biological and stepchildren alike, were part of the story. They were visible on album covers, stage performances, and family documentaries. It was easy for the world to assume that, when Johnny's life came to an end, his legacy would be distributed across this entire family tree. But in reality, emotional closeness and legal inheritance are not always the same thing. Behind the scenes, the family structure created layers of complexity. He had children from a first marriage. She also had children from a previous marriage. Together, they had one son. Over the decades, relationships shifted. Some children grew closer to him later in life. Others lived more private lives. Some worked directly in the family business, while others pursued independent paths. So while the family publicly projected unity, decisions about his career and finances increasingly flowed through June. As his health declined in later years, her influence over business affairs deepened. She helped oversee recording sessions. She managed communications with labels. She became central to estate planning conversations that would quietly determine how Johnny Cash's empire would be handled after death. To many observers, none of this seemed unusual. Spouses often manage each other's careers. Families often blend. Estate planning is common for high-profile figures, but in the case of Johnny Cash, timing would prove decisive, especially when behind the scenes, the loyalty lines were deeply etched. Roseanne, Kathy, Cindy, and Tara remained tethered to the pre-fame version of their father. To them, Johnny was the man who belonged to Vivien, and June was often viewed as the force that had dismantled their original family unit and taken over their happy life. Meanwhile, John Carter Cash was the only child born into the redemption era. He was the product of the legend, not the struggle. Because he was the only male heir and the only child shared by both Johnny and June, he became the natural focus of their estate planning. This internal division created a psychological split-screen effect. The daughters were beneficiaries of Johnny's past, inheriting the stories of his early struggles, while John Carter became the steward of his future, inheriting the brand, the publishing, and the business empire. This hidden problem would come to build up and manifest a legal fallout following unforeseen events in the future. Still, the marriage of Johnny and June was undoubtedly a triumph of the human spirit, a union that saved a man's life and gave the world some of its greatest music. But it was also a masterpiece of rebranding. By merging their lives, they created a redemptive story that the public was eager to consume. The cost of that redemption was the subtle exclusion of the people who knew them before the legend took hold. Vivien Liberto, Carl Smith, and Rip Nix were not just footnotes. They were the people who experienced the unvarnished versions of Johnny and June. The tension that remained between the siblings after 2003 was the echo of those previous lives, a reminder that while you can rewrite a legacy through a new marriage and a clever estate plan, you cannot easily reconcile the hearts of two different families. The will that redirected the fortune. When Johnny Cash passed away in September 2003, the world believed the story had reached its final plot. But in the quiet offices of estate attorneys, a different chapter was being read. The legal reality of the Cash empire was dictated by a plan finalized during a period of immense personal loss. Only 4 months earlier, in May 2003, Johnny had lost his beloved wife and partner, June Carter Cash. Her death had already set the gears of the family's financial future in motion, and by the time Johnny followed her, the path of his fortune was already carved in stone. The instructions within his will and various trust structures were precise. While Johnny's 4 daughters from his first marriage were provided for, with each reportedly receiving a payout of $1 million, the core of the Man in Black empire was not divided equally. He had utilized a revocable trust, which is a legal tool designed to keep the details of his wealth out of the public eye, while ensuring a swift transfer of power. The most valuable assets, including the rights to his name and likeness, his publishing interests, and the authority over his vast archival recordings, were centralized. Instead of being spread across the entire family tree, the stewardship of the Cash legacy was funneled primarily to one person, his and June's only son, John Carter Cash. This was the turning point that would eventually ripple through the family. By naming John Carter as the primary executor and heir to the business side of the estate, Johnny ensured the brand would be managed by a single voice rather than a committee of 5 siblings. Legally, the plan was solid and executed exactly as he had intended in his final years. However, for the public and some of his children, the result was a stark difference from the image of a shared family dynasty. The engine of the Cash fortune, a multi-million-dollar industry that would only grow after his death, now rested in the hands of a single branch of the family, leaving his daughters as beneficiaries of his past, but not partners in his future. No laws were violated, no documents were hidden. Estate attorneys later confirmed that everything had been executed according to Johnny and June's expressed wishes, but emotionally, the outcome landed with shock. Many fans had assumed his fortune would be divided evenly among all his children. Many had assumed that a family so publicly united would continue to operate as a collective. Instead, they learned that legacy management had become centralized and that some family members had far greater control than others. It was not a story of theft or betrayal. It was a story of estate planning intersecting with the unpredictability of life and death. Because both passed within months of each other, the shift happened abruptly, before the family or the public had time to absorb it. In the end, the fortune did exactly what Johnny Cash's legal documents instructed it to do. But the result diverged sharply from what the world imagined. The fallout inside the family. For a time after Johnny and June's deaths, there was silence. Grief overshadowed everything else. The family mourned privately while the world mourned publicly. Tribute concerts were organized. Memorial albums were released. The Cash name remained wrapped in reverence. But eventually reality set in. The estate was moving forward. Business decisions were being made. Licensing deals were being approved. Archival projects were underway, and some family members began to realize just how little involvement they had in any of it. Johnny's daughters from his first marriage had grown up with him before the fame turned into a full-scale enterprise. They remembered the father who wrote letters from the road, who played guitar in the living room, who struggled with demons long before stadiums ever chanted his name. As the years passed, the financial gap between a fixed $1 million inheritance and the compounding royalties of a global icon became impossible to ignore. In 2007, the friction moved from private conversations into a federal courtroom. The 4 daughters initiated a lawsuit that would become the most significant legal proceeding in the family's history. The battle centered on Johnny's signature song, Ring of Fire. Because songwriting royalties are a perpetual stream of income, the daughters argued that, as Johnny's biological heirs, they were entitled to a portion of the copyright renewal rights under the United States Copyright Act. Their legal team argued that the song was so synonymous with their father that its benefits should be shared among all his children. However, the defense, led by John Carter Cash's legal team, presented an ironclad counter-argument to refute those claims. They argued that Johnny Cash didn't technically own the song's publishing. Ring of Fire was co-written by June Carter Cash and Merle Kilgore. Legally, the song was June's asset, and upon her death in May 2003, her assets passed to her husband and her son. When Johnny died, his interest in June's assets flowed rightfully and directly to John Carter. The proceedings reached a climax in 2009 when a federal judge issued a definitive ruling. The court did not just rule against the daughters, it questioned their legal standing to even bring the suit. The judge determined that because the copyright was legally categorized as June Carter Cash's property, Johnny's children from a previous marriage had no claim to it, regardless of how much their father had popularized the song. This ruling was a watershed moment. It effectively ended any hope of the daughters gaining a seat at the table of the Cash-Carter corporate empire. It solidified a reality where one sibling held the veto power over the family's public history, while the others became spectators to their father's commercial afterlife. In the years following the 2009 dismissal, the proceedings shifted from the courtroom to the boardroom. The family has since moved into a period of uneasy peace. While John Carter Cash remains the sole legal executor and primary beneficiary of the ongoing royalties, a more collaborative, though still centralized approach has emerged. In this approach, he still holds the legal right to approve or deny any project using his father's name, from the Walk the Line film to the use of The Man Comes Around in commercials. To maintain family harmony, modern projects such as the Johnny Cash Museum or specific archival releases often involve consultations with the sisters. However, these are professional courtesies rather than legal requirements. The legal proceedings left a lasting mark on the family's public narrative. Roseanne Cash has spoken openly about the difficulty of seeing her father's image managed as a brand in which she has no ownership, highlighting the emotional cost of estate plans that prioritize business efficiency over familial equality. The complete details rarely became public, yet the emotional fracture was real. As seen after, some daughters expressed feelings of exclusion. Others described the heartbreak that their father's name was now being managed without their participation. They did not accuse anyone of stealing from them. Instead, they spoke of the sense that a shared legacy had become a private enterprise. On the other side, John Carter Cash maintained that he was simply fulfilling the wishes of both his father and mother. He took on the role of estate executor, archivist, and curator of Johnny's artistic history. Unlike physical assets, music catalogs do not depreciate. If anything, they grow in value as generations pass. Each time a song is streamed, purchased, broadcast, or synchronized with visual media, royalties flow. Each anniversary release brings renewed sales. Each biopic sends listeners back to the originals. The estate did not merely preserve Johnny's work, it actively expanded its earning potential. In 2005, the biographical film Walk the Line was released. It introduced Johnny Cash's story to a massive mainstream audience that included millions who had not lived through his peak years. The film earned awards, reignited album sales, and drove streams of his back catalog. The estate approved the project, benefited from its success, and gained a powerful new generation of listeners. Since the fallout, there has not been a publicized, full sibling reunion photo with all 5 children in several years. Truthfully, the most recent significant family gathering that was publicly acknowledged occurred around the restoration of Johnny Cash's childhood home in Diaz, Arkansas. While the siblings support the preservation of their father's history, they often attend events at different times or in smaller subgroups, either consisting of the 4 sisters appearing together or sometimes John Carter appearing with one of the sisters. Roseanne Cash has been the most vocal about the healing process. In recent interviews, she has noted that while the legal issues were painful and complicated, she maintains a relationship with her brother. The siblings have reportedly moved into a phase of radical acceptance, acknowledging that while the estate plan was not what they would have chosen, their shared love for their father outweighs the legal ledger. For John Carter, centralized control prevented exploitation of Johnny's image and work. For Johnny's daughters, shared blood and shared history did not translate into shared stewardship. A family that once appeared united on stage now existed in separate spheres, one managing the legacy, the others watching it from a distance, but all sharing the same deep love for a man they once looked up to. Meanwhile, the world continues to listen to Johnny Cash as if nothing had changed. New generations discover him through streaming platforms. In the end, there were no winners and no villains, only people adjusting to an outcome they had not fully expected. The only certain outcome was that the business of Johnny Cash's legacy continues to grow, and while many are not too pleased at not being involved, it appears to be managed just fine so far. What are your thoughts on the will? Tell us in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Please leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this.